Not only has coronavirus really hit America, but socialism is here. No, not because of Bernie Sanders, because of the Trumpster. Bitcoin, what the fuck? GDXJ, what the fuck? JNUG, what the fuck? It's been that kind of week. Seriously speaking, we'll talk about the response to the coronavirus here in the U.S. There's breaking news everywhere. President Trump has just declared a national emergency. We'll try to break that down and what that means. The bottom line is, the richer you are, the better you'll do. I am Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, the witty, the smart, the intelligent, the insightful, the booked triple-digit gains early in this gold bull market earlier in the year, Mr. Nick Hodge. This is episode 61 of Bizarro World, and man, it is a nut show out there. How are you, Nick?
As well as one can be. I think Gerardo taking it all in, along with everyone else, texting and calling family and friends, checking in on one another, and trying and largely failing to get meaningful work done.
Let's start with that. I think that is important. I see that you sent several reminders and updates to subscribers, as did I this week. You know, obviously commenting and opining on the market and the direction that things are going, which we'll get to in just a bit. But I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think, you know, with the panic that's going on globally, everything from coronavirus to, you know, the situation that's developing again in Iraq via Iran, it's important to keep sight of the important things, right? Which is, of course, family, friends, loved ones, taking a little time for yourself to realize that this will pass, but there are definitely some precautions, and I want to get right to that. That if you have older members in your family, and by older, it's not to insult anyone, it's the vulnerable according to the CDC, which is 55, 60 and up with underlying health conditions, please, by all means, not just them, but you, the younger people in your family, please take precautions, because that is the segment of the population globally that is really going to be affected. And the numbers bear this out by this coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. Any thoughts there, Nick? And I know you have some because of family and friends, obviously.
I mean, I think we're all seeing a lot of the same things. We know who's being affected. I think people fall into certain groups, right? They're either over preparing or under preparing, or over informed, or completely and utterly under or misinformed. And so I just think, reaching out, checking in, making sure they have a firm grasp on the situation and the easy things you can do to prevent its spread. And just, you know, because they probably like to hear from you. Events like this can be isolating. They can make you, you know, feel like you're alone. And a lot of old folks, unfortunately, do have to face a lot of things alone. And so, check in on those folks, or if you're in the position to make donations to quality organizations that help those folks, especially as it comes to meals and things, as they become unable to leave their homes due to quarantine or lockdowns. Those things are important.
Let's talk markets. Let's get to it. Gold closed right around the 1518 level, sold off drastically this week. We've mentioned time and time again that we thought the velocity of the moves in the bond market, the gold market, and the major indices around the world would accelerate. That has absolutely been the case this week. Silver was absolutely slaughtered, down some 8% just today. Today being Friday, of course, we record on Friday and publish on Monday. Copper has been remarkably resilient, holding right around that 249 level. It seems like copper has bottomed, because despite all of the bad news that we've got in terms of the response globally, and specifically here in the U.S., which we're going to get to in a bit, it refuses to go down below that 248, 249 level. So that's, you know, if you're looking for some encouragement, there's some there. Central banks around the world did what we said they would do, because it's all they can do, right? Cut and spend. The Bank of Japan injected 500 billion yen Norway's central bank cut the rate by 50 basis points. The Bank of Korea is in talks over a possible emergency rate cut. We have our Fed here in the U.S. next week is expected to cut, if not 75 basis points, maybe all the way down to zero. And some people are speculating that negative interest rates are on their way here. We had the biggest single day gain in the Dow today, nearly 10% since 2008. And despite that, the Dow still lost 10% this week, while the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ slid more than 8% each. To top that off, President Trump has declared a national emergency and has decided that, like we told you he would, the banks, the oil companies, amongst others, we're going to be, the first priority, and sick and old people and savers and vulnerable amongst you, you can figure it out. Let's go one at a time, Nick. Let's talk gold, drastic moves in the market. You and I were talking a bit off air, some of the ETFs, JNUG was down 66% today. It closed at 447. Provide some context as to where this thing was just last month.
Oh, GDX was over. Excuse me. JNUG was over $100 last month, and of course that's a leveraged ETF on the junior sector. But this is an ETF that was trading, in the $90 to $100 range in the second and third weeks of February, and like you say today, closed below $5. Just leverage products to gold stock upside have been demolished, and that's because gold and gold stocks have been hammered hard. Gold was resilient for a bit, but in the past couple of days has taken it on the chin. Closed down today, Friday the 13th, yesterday the 12th, the 11th it was down, and down the 10th as well. So from March 9th, when it was over $1,700 to today, we've gone, down to 1,520 or so. It doesn't feel good. It's not what you initially expect, right? You think it's going to be a safe haven, but there really has been no safe haven here other than the dollar to some extent and bonds to some extent, which has driven yields to record lows in the 5, 10, 20, and 30-year U.S. instruments. And so it's a baby in bathwater thing. It's the same as in 2008, and you're seeing a lot of this analysis from other people. You've no doubt heard or read or seen about the margin calls. You saw Rick Rule on Bloomberg talking about that. What's his quote? Gold stocks are stocks, and when people are selling stocks, gold stocks are not immune. And that has certainly been the case over the past 2 or 3 weeks as positions that we talk about here and ones that we don't that are quality, pick your name, has been cut in half, 40, 50% from what we thought were bargain valuations a month ago. And so it's just utter carnage. And so you're seeing infighting among gold bulls. People are asking sneering questions. I thought gold was a safe haven. And so let's unpack that a little bit. Look, gold's still at a 6-year high. It saw this coming. It ran from $1,300 to $1,700 in the past 4 months. So it was baked in. It saw it coming. What else? Like I said, it's gonna sort of mirror 2008, 2009, where yes, gold and gold stocks got whacked during the carnage. But then what happened? Gold went on to outperform for the next 3 years. As did related equities. And then the last point before I be quiet is that with these yields going so low, we have negative real rates with inflation, and you really couldn't ask for a better recipe for gold coming out of this thing, right?
I think some perspective is important. I love that you mentioned that gold is at a 6-year high. If 1,500 is all that we're going to see in the way of a drop. And I do think, by the way, technically that because we closed before that or below that 1550 level, that there is a chance that we might see mid 1400s early next week, in part because of this declaration that the Trump administration is rolling out, which, they're purchasing oil in the open market. I joked about socialism coming to America, but, there's going to be $50 billion as a response to this coronavirus breakout. A part of that is going to go to buying oil in the open market. Despite the Fed coming in and just basically saying we are going to throw the kitchen sink at keeping rates low, the rates haven't really cooperated. We saw a 10-year that flirted with, the low 30 basis point mark earlier this week. It closed right around the 1% mark today. That is a huge move when the Fed is telegraphing that it will provide as much liquidity as the Treasury market needs. And let's be clear that this is the Fed pulling out the bazooka in hopes of keeping those rates under control, because if it loses control of the short-term rates, it's game over for central banks. And again, everybody is looking at the freeze up in bank-to-bank lending here in the U.S. and thinking that is the big danger. And I am telling you, folks, like I've been saying for years, I always said that the blow up would happen in the bond market. I always said that for gold to be in a real bull market, the next one, the one I believe we're in now, that gold and the dollar would have to hold hands together higher, along with the major indices. So I'm going to take the contrarian view on the major U.S. indices. I think we may see another 5 to 10% down even after today's gain. And then I think you're going to get a slingshot move higher. I also believe that rates are going to have to come down because, of course, we talked about the Fed cutting next week, which I believe happens. But the action is going to come out of Europe, folks. You need to watch the banks there. The Fed pulled out the bazooka not because our banks here in the U.S. are undercapitalized. As a matter of fact, on Wednesday, 5 or 6 of the major bank CEOs or representatives sat with President Trump and told you how well capitalized they were, how they learned from 2008, how they were going to extend lending to the everyday person that needs a loan, which I don't think will happen. We'll talk about that in a bit. But they made it clear that the banks here in the U.S. are okay. This liquidity is a way to try to keep rates down because I believe next week you're going to start seeing serious cracks in the European bank scenario. And I think that the Fed understands that if Treasury rates in the short term go up, it's game over for Europe, who for all intents and purposes has killed their bond market. They are the only bid for bonds. And that's coming to the U.S., but it has to come in order. It's Europe, Japan, and then the U.S. We're not in danger of blowing up here in the U.S. just yet. It's going to take some time. I think if you look at the dollar is telling you that. Everything sold off but the dollar. The dollar is now again at 98.5. It hit a low of, I think, 95, 94 earlier in the week. It's a massive move in the currency markets. A massive move. And if gold's going to come back and do what I think it's going to do and push 1750 here in the next month and a half, it's going to have to do so alongside the dollar. That's my rant on Europe, the bond market, the liquidity bazooka, gold, the major U.S. indices, and what happens next.
And there's unknowns as well. I mean, the Bank of Japan has been directly buying equities. There's certainly potential for that to happen with European central banks and U.S. central banks, I would have to assume.
Oh, I think it's in the cards. I think it's absolutely in the cards. I think the ECB will add to that. I think the BOJ will add to its asset purchase plan. And again, they're floating the idea here. And you and I said that from the very beginning. We said, the administration and the Fed's going to protect bankers and corporations and the stock market before all else. And they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that those sectors stay afloat. It's why the rally today on Friday was so pronounced after this declaration of national emergency. Let's get to what the declaration should have focused on. Testing. We have the NBA now has postponed its season because of coronavirus. Major League Baseball, same thing. NHL, same thing. March Madness, college basketball, same thing. All across the board. Concerts are getting canceled. It's across the board cancellations. And We just heard a speech from President Trump, which basically said, hey, I'm coming to the rescue of the stock market and corporations. And oh, by the way, in a month or so, and he bragged about this, and this pisses me off, we'll have 5 million tests available within a month. Don't think we'll need them. 5 million tests, Nick, in a country with 327 million people. And the focus is on the stock market. The focus is on buying oil in the open market, which I'm not against. I just want to call it what it is. This is exactly the type of stuff that Bernie Sanders got accused of doing. He just wanted to do it with education and healthcare, right? Mr. Trump and his administration is willing to do it for corporations and the oil sector, and we'll see what else comes out of it as a result of this approach. But let's call it what it is. It's corporate welfare. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right. The same with the farmers, which you talked about months ago when where the trade war was the flavor du jour, and talking about how it was impacting the farmers the worst. But they get handouts from the Republicans, but they're not called handouts, and that's not called socialism. It's the same thing, and this virus is exacerbating and bringing to the fore many of the things that we've talked about. And so you even saw Trump say that, he didn't want to sign a package. I haven't seen if they voted on that package yet today, by the way. I got to read news, but Congress was supposed to vote on an aid package today. And he was saying he wasn't going to support it if it included, certain benefits or what he called handouts. And so you can really see the juxtapositions in many philosophies and ideas in modern U.S. politics when, a virus breaks out and all of a sudden Republican senators are calling for free testing. And no one stops and says, hey, wait a minute, isn't that to socialize medicine, right? Or one payer policy, right? Which it certainly is. And then on the private side, you have companies like Darden, yes, which owns Olive Garden and Longhorn Steakhouse and a couple of other chain restaurants. You can position it how you want. They would say we stepped up and offered hourly workers paid leave so they can stay home if they contract the coronavirus to help prevent its spread, et cetera, without feeling obligated to work so they don't lose pay. And then conversely, you have people saying, well, why the fuck did it take a global pandemic for you to offer this to your workers, right? And so it's just a fascinating debate. It's interesting how, I was saying just 2 weeks ago, Gerardo, how in the fulcrum of the crisis, the solutions become so clear. And here it is, the fulcrum of the crisis, and we're just laying waste to things, right? Like, coverage for hourly workers is so contentious before. Nope, done by, a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Another example I saw is like the onerous application process to get approved as a nurse. I think it was in Massachusetts I saw where you had to go through an application process, wait for the state to get it, wait months to hear back. Well, all of a sudden, you can become a registered nurse in 24 hours. Well, then you got to ask the question, why the hell did it take 6 months of bureaucracy before? And so, I just get excited talking about it, but this is like the positive change that crises usher in, right? And that's the upside. Like what do you do to come together and change policies and institutions for the good? And we're seeing some of that, which I think will prove to be historic in real time. And so it's just interesting. And then you get that fight in Congress where it's the same thing I just talked about. Is it the government's responsibility? Is it private corporations' responsibility? Is it government's responsibility to make it the private corporation's responsibility? And so just fascinating things going on, and sad on one front to your point about having the test available. And we covered it last week, so I won't kick the horse too much, but just continues to be slow, continues to be chaotic, and continues to And people are catching on, right? Like, wait, I can't get a test, but the whole Utah Jazz team just got tested. Like, hey,
that's where I was going, and that's what I want to make sure we highlight. We don't want to kick the horse because you can listen to last week's episode. We kind of told you everything that how it was going to play out this week, despite all the surprises and the things that came out of nowhere, right? But we told you that the Fed would act. We're telling you now that the Fed's going to cut big time here this coming week. We're telling you it better get control of the bond market, or Europe's banking sector is in deep, deep trouble. Those are all things that we've been saying for a very long time. But the one thing that I do want to highlight is how is it that the Utah Jazz are able to get their hands on 58 tests within hours of requesting them. And most of this country, 99.999% of America, I don't care about your political affiliation, of America, cannot get tested.
Well, money talks.
That's it. And again, without belaboring the point too much, for everyone that's listening, whatever your political affiliation or party is, we need to start asking better questions of our representatives. And I know we say fourth turning every week. Guess what, everybody? We're going to continue saying it because it's happening. The youth that's growing up and seeing this, I have these conversations with my 11-year-old, and the questions he asks me are interesting because of the perspective of an 11-year-old. And so these are things that are just clear as day to him. Like, wait a minute, how come if you have money, you can get tested and a doctor will come to the house and check up on us, but everybody else can't get an appointment to walk in, and they're telling them to stay home, self-quarantine, and don't go anywhere? Don't know how they'll make a living, don't know how they'll pay their rent or their mortgage, don't know how they'll pay their loans back. They're just being told to stay home, but because we don't have the means to test you. It's money, everybody. And right now the system works for those that have. It's been that way for a little bit, but I'm telling you, the younger generation isn't going to stand for that. It's going to change. We are in the midst of a fourth turning, and there's, there's so much going on. It's hard to keep up, right? It's all breaking in real time here. Mr. Rogers has coronavirus.
So many people. Justin Trudeau's wife has coronavirus. The Prime Minister of Canada.
Who was at PDAC.
Who was, and that's right. There was PDAC. Yeah, there was coronavirus at PDAC for sure. That was confirmed. There was an Australian official that met with Attorney General Bill Barr and Ivanka Trump last week, who's now been shown to be positive for coronavirus. The president of Brazil has tested positive for coronavirus after calling it a fantasy last week. And
hanging out with Trump, shaking hands. I think Trump has coronavirus, by the way, if you want me to put my tinfoil hat on. I think he's got it, and he's waiting till the thing passes before he gets tested so he can tell everyone, see, I don't have it. He's refused to get tested. He's shaking hands with at least 4 people that had it a week later.
It's like I say, it's everywhere. That was what we talked about last week, how the spread has been so rampant. We're learning now that, some people are asymptomatic, so don't even know if they've had it. And
correct.
I think this thing is going to be everywhere. Did you see the high-end CDC estimates? Over 1 million U.S. deaths. If caveat here, big asterisk, if no interventions are taken, of which some interventions have already been taken that weren't included in that estimate. So that's a really, dramatic number, but crazy nonetheless, right?
Again, 1 million deaths. And this is where the lack of testing just really upsets me. There's no way of knowing who has what where because we don't have the infrastructure. We just don't have it. We don't have the infrastructure to be able to identify who's sick, where they're at, how to contain it. I can tell you here locally in Round Rock, right outside of Austin where I live, we're going into spring break for the kids, and the timing couldn't be better because, it's a couple of weeks where the kids will be home. But I kept my kids from school today. It was for my high school, for my 16-year-old, it was senior skip day and he's a junior. He was like, we're not going to do anything anyway. So I said, well, just stay home, and my youngest, we made the decision last night to keep him for the same reason. There wasn't much going on. He's in 6th grade. And sure enough, in the morning, we got a call saying that, there were reports of a student possibly having to be tested for coronavirus. And so out of just being cautious. They were canceling school today on Friday, and so that ended up being a good call. But again, that person would have to wait for a test, and there's no guarantee that person would get one. So it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it didn't have to. Had we reacted as a country the way that we should have reacted. We shouldn't be declaring a national emergency a month after we realized this was serious, and we saw it happening in real time. In January. Yeah, 2 months.
It's March. Yeah.
Madness. We didn't even talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is Bitcoin dead? Bitcoin is down to 5,000. It touched 4,000 earlier this week. That caught me off guard. I got to admit, I was caught a bit off guard with that one. I've expected the moves in the gold price and the velocity and the stock market and the initial sell-off in the gold equities and the juniors has been worse than I anticipated. Everything sold off, but I think the rebound will be healthy. But I didn't, and I'm no Bitcoin expert, but I definitely didn't think Bitcoin would get hit the way it got hit.
Yeah, me either. And I'll tell you, it makes sense in retrospect. Now, one, I haven't been paying attention to it. And so, I know I'm not the market, but, when shit hits the fan, you go to what's proven. And I think Bitcoin is just so new that in historic moments like this, where we're talking about, biggest down day since 1987, right? Most volatility, biggest down day on the TSX since World War II, for Christ's sake. That, when you're dealing with VIX at 71 and $75 moves in gold, that these flashy new cryptocurrencies are sort of an afterthought. I don't think that's always going to be the case, and nothing quantitative here. This is going to be anecdotal. You had Edward Snowden tweeting about Bitcoin today, saying it's the first time in a long time he felt like Bitcoin was a buy. Take that as you want. The angle I think about is like the dirty money angle, right? Like, have you just looked at the dollars in your pocket for the past week? Like, I've just been looking at them as dirty. And I know that the Chinese government was talking about, don't use currency can spread disease. And early on, that was one of the conspiracy angles, right? Like, oh, is this thing engineered to kill people? Is this thing engineered to, ban paper currency or whatever? And that's certainly the upside of a digital currency, being able to transfer an asset wherever you want, make a retail transaction without having to touch any yuan or anything. And so I don't think this is a death blow to Bitcoin in any means, but I don't think it's got a seat at the adults table for the time being. Agreed.
Let's talk things that make me happy. Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 23 years in prison. That made me smile. And obvious, you don't have to get into details, right? Rapist gets to go to prison for a long time. Rapist is older. Rapist likely dies in prison or shortly thereafter. That made me smile. So there was some good news this week.
How long do you think he keeps up the act with the walker?
I'll keep my comments to myself on that one. He may want to keep that walker around.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm good to see. I'm waiting to hear more information. I didn't follow it too closely. There was a bigger fish to fry clearly this week, but I'm interested to hear from the jurors, which I have read was or is really difficult. Like, apparently none of them want to talk. I was reading in an article today, like no journalist has been able to get any of them. So interested to see what was discussed in the jurors' room.
Agreed. A reporter asked President Trump, do you take any responsibility for the backstop in testing and the lack of tests available to the American public? He said, I don't take any responsibility at all. Next question. Next question. Oil is up on news that the U.S. and President Trump and his administration will be, quote unquote, filling up the reserve at these incredible prices. And they're paying a great price because why not, right? So oil closed up 5.87, nearly 6%. This as the Saudis and the Russians continue to play oil chicken. Did you see what the Saudi crown prince decided to do right after the Russia-Saudi Arabia spat, and when it appeared that the 84-year-old king's hold on the throne was weakening because there's rumors that he's sick and dying.
Out of the corner of my eye, I spied the fact that he is ready to consolidate power. Yes, go on.
So he arrested cousins and basically anybody who he thought that they may have a right to the throne. So I just thought, again, this is the turn of 84 years. The king has held on to the throne, or he's 84 years old, but he's held on to the throne, for decades on end. And again, the system may not change for now, but the faces are definitely changing out there. And I'm really curious to see how that part of the world reacts to this power grab by him. And that's, we'll wait and see how that develops. I just wanted to put that out there because I believe there's going to be more to that story here in the near term.
Yeah, keep an eye on it. Oil's been a tough one to figure out. It's on the one hand really scary because an oil fall like we saw last weekend, down 30% overnight, to me would portend some sort of really, really serious worldwide economic doom. But then you have to layer in a lot of other things. You have to layer in the OPEC meeting. You have to enter in the whole geopolitics and Machiavellian nature of the shale producers and what Russia and Saudis want to do to them, perhaps jointly. There's talk that Putin did what Putin did in concert with the Saudis to drive the price down to fuck the shale producers, right? This is a complex game. And then there's the whole electrification thing, right? Where we know that there's a massive transition underway, and you wonder, how much demand destruction is being priced in. It might be a bit early for that, but there's a lot of things going on with oil, and certainly what you just said is being done to consolidate power in the Saudi kingdom. So how else can you say it? We've already talked about the historic nature of the moves, the bond yields, the now further unprecedented central bank intervention. Hear what's going on with the Saudis. These are big, big, big things.
Let's talk about the Fed's intervention, the initial one. The Fed will, quote, extend its purchases across a range of maturities to include bills, notes, Treasury, inflation-protected securities, and here's the one, other instruments. That will be defined later. And if the stock market throws a big enough fit, it will include asset purchases in the stock market like many other central banks already do. The central bank will begin purchasing coupon-bearing securities. It started yesterday, Thursday. It will now continue through April 13th. This is permanent, folks. This will not end in April until it all explodes, because it can't end in April. If rates go too high, you have sovereign defaults all across the globe. You have money rushing into the dollar, sending it much higher. That's going to happen anyway. And then you have, basically governments and central banks and economies imploding, and a great reset, more fourth turning stuff, right? So it can't back away from these purchases. It's just impossible without the kind of contagion that will inspire. It's going to happen anyway, but this will delay it for a tiny little bit. Second part of the new operations, we'll see the New York Fed offer $500 billion in a 3-month repo operation and a 1-month operation. These will happen on a weekly basis through the remainder of the program. In addition, there will be at least $175 billion in overnight repos and $45 billion in 2-week operations. This is historic. We're talking trillions of dollars of liquidity, and interest rates went up. What comes next, Nick?
Oh, yeah, I wish I knew. I think they're, like you say, intervene to buy equities directly. We've seen mortgage rates going up a little bit. We've seen the market not respond favorably to the bazooka this week. The market went down yesterday after the Fed announced that hard. It bounced back today on Friday, went down hard on Thursday. And so the market is telling them more now. And like you say, they have to listen. And so I know we've been talking about, the punch bowls and shots of heroin and the market junkie forever. But this piling on of paper really is fuel for what's going to be the ultimate gold bonfire. We just have to take it day by day, right? Because it's not going to happen overnight. You've been saying there's going to be $50 to $100 moves in gold, both to the upside and the downside. We're experiencing those now. And so I think we just have to stick to the game plan, right? We, here's my thought process this week. Sorry, I got to talk just for a little bit longer. Months ago, you were asking me about, I had sold some of my retirement funds, right? And that was like right when all the indicators said that this was coming, like earnings growth was slowing down. We had just started to experience the volatility last year, and it was palpable. Like we knew something like this was coming, but certainly enough, you can never see the black swan, right? And so personally, and you saw this play out in real time if you listen to this podcast, you read what I write, I was lulled back into complacency, right? I put that money back to work, even though I knew, like I'm sure you knew and lots of other people knew, what was ahead. And so that's not to say that we were caught flat-footed, and that's not to say that we haven't lost money. Yes, no one could have seen the black swan of coronavirus coming. Yes, I lost a lot of money over the past month.
Have you sold? That's an important point.
No.
Okay.
And,
so you're down.
You're down. I know you don't lock in losses until you sell, of course, but I'm confident in the way I was positioned heading into this. No, I didn't have all my money out of the market. And yes, I took losses, but the positions I hold, and this is another Rick Rule line here, is like you make money on the buy, right? Like I'm confident at the valuations at which I own my speculative gold positions. And so I'm sticking to my playbook. I don't know if that answered what you asked me or not.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And we'll get into that in just a little bit, because I want to talk about, how important it is to buy correctly and know why you bought, and then ask yourself if that's still true after a 50% move to the downside, which we've seen this week, right?
Absolutely. And so nothing has fundamentally changed, with the companies, the thesis for which I own them, whether that's, the asset or the management, et cetera. And in many cases, and I got to say this again, I was comfortable investing in them at $1,200 gold, at $1,250 gold, right? And so at $1,550 or $1,520 gold, I'm still comfortable. I know that's $150 less than it just was, but it's still $300 more than it was several months ago.
If you would have told me a year ago that Midas Gold would trade at 36 cents Canadian with gold at 1,500, I would have thought you were crazy, right? And yet that's where we're at. So back to the question about approach and buying correctly, and Rick's comment on, it's a lot like the real estate market, right? You make a lot of your money when you buy correctly. I initially bought Midas in the portfolio, I believe at 60 cents. I thought I bought correctly then. Here we are, at 36 cents. And every reason why I bought Midas Gold still holds true, and even more so today, right? 6.6 million ounces of high margin gold ounces, amazing exploration upside, great jurisdiction, high likelihood that they get their permit early next year. That's been delayed a bit, but that's not the company's fault. That's the government's fault, as it usually is. But every box that I checked, amazing management, the fact that they would be able to raise capital even during tough times, all of those things are as true today as they were then, even more so now. And yet the company is down some 50 or 60% from the initial purchase price. If you want to get to some of the smaller explorers that I really like, Azúcar Minerals, Newcrest came in at $1.35, $1.35 a little over a year ago, and put, $19-20 million, if I recall correctly, into the company to explore the El Cobre project in Veracruz, Mexico, a copper gold project. That is highly prospective. Rigs are turning right now. They're trying to figure out where the deep feeder zones are. There's a good starter pit in the Norte zone that's already there. It's a company that has about $8 to $9 million Canadian, yet it has a market cap of $6.5 million Canadian right now. So there's more cash in the company. You get CEO Morgan Poliquin's expertise. You have a starter pit in the Norte zone, and you have Newcrest in at $1.35, and the company's trading at 9 cents with a $6.5 million market cap. I can't sell into that. Even if the liquidity was there, even if I could sell into it, I can't do it because, yes, the company's missed on some of the targets, but the original thesis that it would have the capital to properly test this project is still intact. It's still in play. You still have that amazing management team, moving that project forward. And I could go on. I could go down the list. But that's just the case for a lot of the juniors. That will change. And when it does, it's going to be quick and it's going to go. What's the uranium hashtag on Twitter that's so popular? Hashtag violent upside. That's what it's going to be like. And so that brings me to my next question. We saw President Trump in his emergency declaration, come out and say, hey, we can't believe these prices are so low in the oil spot market. We're going to go ahead and fill up the reserve. Where the fuck is the announcement on uranium, Nick? What did uranium ever do? Because there's been more starts to a uranium bull market in the past decade, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, this year, that have been met with absolute just apathy by everyone involved. And again, on this one, I get there's a lot going on, but we had a moment during this press conference to say we're going to fill up the reserve because it's strategic. It's an industry that we need. It's important to the U.S. And I agree with that, by the way. I joked about socialism. I was half serious and half not. But the part where I actually like that, I think it's wise. I think, like you mentioned, there's a large sector of our economy in certain places that depends on that. And we don't want to become dependent the way we have with uranium. But where is the announcement that even the energy secretary said was happening a week or two ago? And we've just heard nothing but crickets, nothing. Did I miss it?
No, you didn't miss it. And I'll address uranium in 1 second. Let me go back to Azúcar for just 1 second. And you're talking how it's trading less than cash, and you could go down the list. And that's exactly what I was going to say. You could go down the list and make that case, and not just for the quality speculations, but for the quality major producers in the space. You got companies like Sibanye, for example, that was $13 last month. That closed today just north of $5. And so, one, there's value out there if you have dry powder. We know that. But two, you don't have a market without a buyer and a seller. And so someone is acquiring these shares as they're being puked up, whether that's Sibanye or whether that's Azúcar. And I'll not quote, but tell you what David Erfle was writing about last week, talking about how the only people out here buying and are us and the 30 people listening to the Bizarro World podcast and people like us, right? And those are strong hands, right? You asked me if I've sold anything. I haven't sold anything. I've only bought. And so when it does come time, this spring, I hate to use the spring in the coil, but it's now more tightly wound. Like I own more shares of these companies than I did a week ago. And that's fewer shares that are available to be bought when people want to buy them. Right. And that's the point that I wanted to make on the Azucar. And the uranium, you haven't missed anything. No one cares about uranium.
I thought they changed their mind because all my uranium positions were down another 50% this week.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to say is now I don't feel so bad for having sold Fission a little bit ago. But, the uranium market is so small compared to the oil market and so small compared to, we were blaming impeachment at first and then bam, here comes coronavirus. And so in the face of that, I just have to assume that, it's like Bitcoin, right? It doesn't get a seat at the adult table right now.
Correct. The CDC just released 3 important words on resisting coronavirus. Do you want to hear what they are?
Wash your hands.
Stop being poor. Oh,
that's not official.
No, it's not. Twitter sometimes makes me smile, and this makes me smile a little wider than usual because 1, it's true, and 2, it's Paris Hilton. I'll put a link up to it on the podcast here, but it's Paris Hilton wearing a tank top that says "Stop being poor" with her, hands up in the air and her happy blonde self doing what her happy blonde self used to like to do. I haven't seen her in a while, but I think it ties in perfectly what we were saying early in this podcast, right? How it just is it's a sad state of affairs here in this country and everywhere, but let's speak here in the US, that to get a test, you have to be a rich, well-connected NBA basketball player or hockey player, or Tom Hanks. It's just insane to me that that's the status quo and that people aren't out there en masse just demanding access, because there's people. I'm fortunate. My mom and my dad both retired and now live in Mexico after living in this country for over 35 years. They have dual citizenship. They're back home and they're older. And if they were here, I would be extremely worried and even more upset about the fact that, it would be very difficult for them to get a test, despite the fact that relative to most of the U.S. population, we're relatively well off. And so it's I can't imagine the people that are living paycheck to paycheck, that maybe live with their grandmother or live with an elderly parent that has underlying medical conditions, that's already struggling to make ends meet. And now you get this, and very few people high up are providing any options that make any sense for that group. And that's again, I don't want to, continue belaboring that point, but it's important to me. And I things have to change sooner or later. Things have to change. And I hope that this is a wake up call to a lot of people in either party, right?
Well, they are changing and they will change. And, we've only seen the first act of this play, right? And I haven't even been monitoring that closely because I've been looking at market stuff. But in the little bit I've looked, I saw National Guard deployed into a town in New York. I saw, I think it was a university in Ohio was having, quote unquote, unrest or riots where several police had to be deployed. Governor Hogan in Maryland, where I lived for a long time, declared state of emergency yesterday and closed all Maryland schools for 2 weeks. If you've spent any time in Baltimore, your mind will immediately wonder what all those kids are going to do not in school for 2 weeks. You only have to close your eyes and think back a couple of years to the riots that went down during the summer in Baltimore. And so certainly a recipe for some unrest here over the next couple of weeks. And I'm not calling for it or saying it's going to happen, but it already has happened in a couple of instances. And certainly all the ingredients are there for it. So we'll see.
Agreed. Yeah, we'll leave that there. Nick, do you have any happy, positive, insightful stories that would make me smile other than Harvey Weinstein going to jail for 23 years?
Gosh, what did I think about earlier?
Come on, Nick.
Yeah, no, I got some.
Every week I ask for a smile.
One, people aren't going crazy and have been pretty cordial. And so I think just looking for the positive in humanity is a positive. in itself. My wife was out shopping yesterday and Costco was mobbed, and she said nobody was being too crazy. And, I'm talking to people here in my office. I've texted with my neighbors. My rancher sent me an email the other day talking about they got plenty of pigs or whatever. So, that's all real. That's all real positive. I've been reading about, because I happen to be a shareholder in a couple of companies that, have thrust themselves into this coronavirus thing, one on the testing side, and one on the therapeutic side, not necessarily a preventative vaccine, but a therapeutic treatment for people infected. Biotech company I'm involved in called Immunoprecise. And so, you've seen these stories, whatever country it comes out of. Israel is working on a vaccine, whoever it is, here, there. That's sort of positive to me, right? I like seeing those things. If you want something not coronavirus related, what did I read positive today? There was over 1 million acres of forest that were saved from being logged today by a group of hunters in Alaska. I like stories like that because hunters are often cast in a negative light by quote unquote greenies and environmentalists, just like miners that are trying to remediate Superfund sites are cast in a bad light by greenies and environmentalists. But truly, sometimes mining companies can be stewards of the environment, just like oftentimes hunters are stewards of the environment. And so I'll post a link because that's a fuck ton of forest.
It is. It is. Happy news on my end. What do we have? I see that, well, this isn't going to be happy news actually, but it is a step in the right direction. With a big, be careful. Google is partnering with the federal government and the Trump administration to create a website that will help track and analyze and break down recommendations for people that show symptoms on potential symptoms of coronavirus, on where to go and who to call and where to get tested and how to self-quarantine. And so, we've talked over and over how corporations really are, that other branch of government, right? It's what keeps the lobbyist lobbying, and it's what keeps our policy where it's at, whether we're talking gun policy or responses to the opioid crisis, which was, far, and so on and so forth. So what are your thoughts on that, Nick? I mean, one, I'm happy that private, or public companies, I should say, but it's not government, are stepping up at a time where we absolutely need, these people to step up. But two, I can't help but think all the data that Google is going to have as a result of this, right? And so, at what price?
Well, I think as long as it's done as long as it's done in a transparent manner, without a motive for profit, and of course, is that possible? I don't know. I welcome any efforts to inform the community in a transparent way, and certainly Google is in a position to do that with its database and all the information it has, right? But a quick story, right? So I have a monthly meeting or a weekly meeting with my employees via Skype, and we were talking the other day, and I was telling them about how China was able to stamp the disease out so quickly and stop its spread was because they're so draconian and so authoritarian that they literally were able to force people to stay home.
Can I tell you my good news before you ruin it with your story?
Sure.
My good news for the day is that China is slowing down. There were only 8 new cases today. So let me get that out there because I know where your story is going. So that is the great news that made me smile, other than Harvey Weinstein going to prison for being a rapist. Back to you, Nick.
China's making progress. So
yes.
I'm explaining, how they were able to force people to stay in their houses and apartments by literally locking up buildings. How I saw this helmet that law enforcement people were wearing that could scan for people's temperatures, like 100 people a minute. Just like anyway, the helmet was like scanning crowds for temperatures. And so they could pull out people that had a temperature over 100 degrees. And then, of course, the phone app, which I can put a link up to. But, if you were found to be infected with coronavirus, they were tracking you through your phone, where you'd been, who you'd interacted with. And they were using that to stomp it out, right? thoroughly invasive, thoroughly authoritarian, and not something I would advocate for ever. But one of my employees says, "Oh, I would love that." And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I would love that." She was like, "Well, we would be able to, figure it out so quickly." And I'm like, "Yeah, but at what price?" And that's the debate, right? How much freedom do you want to sacrifice for safety?
Agreed. For now, it's Google making a coronavirus information site, everybody. Again, if we need Google to make this site after the Trump administration dismantled the agency that was in charge, he cut off the funding in 2018 for the group that was in charge of keeping track of this stuff and developing the tools that we need in case of an outbreak like this. If we need the Googles of the world to step in, then what the fuck are we doing with these politicians in power? Why do we need them? Why can't, I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Why can't we vote ideas?
You're about to see it because I was thinking about this today. Sorry to cut you off, but I think it was Louisiana I saw today postpone the Democratic primary.
Yep.
And so I was wondering, well, if the primaries get postponed, what does that mean for the general election? And I started thinking about that. But then I started thinking, well, this would be the perfect opportunity just to implement either internet voting, which why don't we have that right in 2020 when I can send tens of thousands of dollars securely at the press of a button, but I can't vote? Come on. It's just clearly a voter suppression tactic. This
must be nice.
This is like what I was talking about earlier, right? About how the, crises usher in changes. Don't make fun of me, Gerardo. And then
Nick problems.
Now I lost my train
I'm so sorry. No. You were talking about if Louisiana can go ahead and postpone.
Right. And so
postpone, not postpone.
This would be the perfect opportunity to implement direct democracy, right? Where you could just, vote on ideas and policies instead of, having to go through some, outdated perhaps system of representatives that don't necessarily have your best interest in mind.
I agree. I think, let me take it from where you left off. So they just postponed the Louisiana primary there, right? Do you think this happens if this continues to escalate in the U.S., which I think it will? I think even the doctors that are being paraded by the Trump administration are saying you should absolutely be prepared for a lot more deaths and a lot more cases because our testing capacity is nil, basically. Do you see a postponement of the general election in November?
Gosh, I hope not. We only really mess with election cycles during, and this is perfect fourth turning stuff, right? Because it would have been the last crisis turning when FDR was allowed another term, right?
You got it.
That perfectly lines up. But no, I don't think it's gonna delay the general election, though. I can certainly see Trump making a case for that, right? Anything to stay in power, which he is solely focused on now. And no, I don't think it's going to happen. But what I do see already happening is basically it's a 3-horse race right now, right? And those 3 horses are each trying to take the lead using coronavirus as a catalyst. So in the last 24 hours, you got both Biden and Sanders, saying that Trump's plan to handle this is not good, and they're doing sort of their own plans, right? So it's almost like you're going to have 3 quasi presidents leading you for the next 3 months, and you'll get to pick which one you think should get the next 4 years in November.
Before we cut this off, do you think the airlines should be bailed out?
No, I don't think the airlines should be bailed out. I didn't think the banks should be bailed out. I don't think the oil companies should be bailed out. We've gotten too far away from pure capitalism, and that's what allows capitalism to be attacked as an evil institution, which it's not. It's this perverted version of capitalism, which is in fact corporatism that we've been practicing that is evil. And so I think if you let true capitalism play out, that is no golden parachutes, no white collar crime exemptions, no bailouts for companies that mishedged, mismanaged, misallocated, and were caught flat-footed and off guard in a black swan event. That's how evolution makes people and things stronger, and that's the force that should be in play in capitalism.
Real capitalism. Well said, Mr. Hodge. I absolutely agree with you, but that was very well articulated. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Well, it's been a heck of a week. We could probably go on for another hour. I think we should probably leave it there. We're not going to talk individual companies, or I'm not, unless you want to, because frankly, if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, there's a lot of names we've sent your way. They're all cheaper than they were yesterday and last week and last month and probably last year. I will give people one tip though. Magna Gold, we talked last week about the game-changing acquisition of the San Francisco mine in Sonora, Mexico, which makes the company a producer. The mines had some issues in the past. Margins weren't what they thought they would be. The gentleman that put that project into production once upon a time when it was run well, Arturo Bonillas, now has it back under the Magna Gold banner. Stock was halted, I believe, a week and a half or so ago, pending the closing of that acquisition and a concurrent $6 million financing, which I understand is going very well and will close soon, despite the market conditions. So the stock's been halted on the Canadian exchange, for some reason, and I will be taking advantage of this and have already a bit by adding to my position. It continues to trade on the U.S. side of it. So if you are in position and want quality gold exposure, Magna Gold is a company that at 25 cents US is right below the price of the financing, which is at 35 cents Canadian. And so MGLQF is the ticker symbol on the OTCQB. I would give that a look and see if you can't build a position, because I believe that Mr. Bonillas and the Magna team will have that San Francisco mine running significantly better right off the bat. So yeah, that's my tip for the week.
Which is in Mexico and not Tejas.
Not Tejas, Mexico. Sí, señor, señor Hodge. Nick, it's been interesting. Does the Fed go to zero next week?
I think you get 3/4.
Okay. I actually think you're right. It has to save something. There isn't much left, right?
Yeah. Backing itself into a corner is what it's been doing, and it's got to leave a little tiny bit of corner, I think, to keep its last shreds of credibility intact before we go negative.
Keep an eye on the bond market, everybody. Keep an eye on what happens in Europe. Keep an eye on Italy's completely shut down. That is a big part of the Eurozone. Germany a few hours ago said that it's making an about face, and they went from austerity basically to saying they're going to do the same thing that the Fed's doing. They're going to go ahead and, throw everything at it, because I don't think they have a choice. And I think they realize they don't have a choice. Germany being the strongest economy in that zone, I don't think it'll matter at the end. I think in 2021, all hell is going to break loose. If you think this is bad, give it 6, 7, 8 months. It's going to get a lot worse. But I do think in the meantime, the stimulus, the initial rounds that we're going to get over the next several months will stabilize things a bit compared to what it was this week. But I think this is the new normal, everyone. $50 to $100 moves in gold. Treasuries moving up a 1/4 point back and forth, up and down. 5-6% moves in the stock market in either direction. That I think is the new norm. So get ready for it. It's here.
And call your mama. She wants to hear from you.
Call your mom. If you have a mom, if you have a dad, if you have loved ones, give them a call. They all want to hear from you. Tell them something nice. Guys, be nice to each other. Take care of each other. Don't be an asshole. If you think you have a fever, don't go to the club and go dancing with everybody and then go hang out with your 70-year-old grandfather or 80-year-old grandfather and expose them potentially to something that could kill them. Even if you are okay, show some consideration, everybody. I am Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, Senor Nicolas Hodge. This is episode 61 of Bizarro World. Have a great week, everybody. Good luck out there.
See ya.